Hello and welcome to another edition of D&D Stories. My name is Rob from the channel Performance Check, and this is the show where I regale you with tales about the time something cool happened within the hit role-playing game Dungeons & Dragons. Last time, Theodrex, the exiled ranger of Hemlon, and Valdane, the wandering sorcerer, were accompanied by King Magnus of Ireland and 30 of his best as they search for the missing prince and princess. They rode hard and fast across the land under the cover of darkness to discover a lighthouse perched upon a cliffside where they had believed the missing prince and princess had been taken to. When they arrived, they found themselves facing a host of reavers, 50 strong, under the employ of the dark infernal powers that threatened the land of Ireland. The king and his men charged these reavers, whilst Valdane and Theodrex made their way up the lighthouse to confront the evil force that had taken the prince and princess. However, it was soon apparent that the princess wasn't who she seemed. She was in fact a succubus who had seduced the prince with her wiles and her magical charms, to ensure that she would be impregnated by royal blood, so that the Devil's Line, a pact made 600 years ago, could now continue. The seed of the prince would ensure that a powerful foe would be born from the succubus, a powerful foe that will reign across the land in darkness for thousands and thousands of years. In the ensuing battle, Theodrex faced down the succubus with her powerful, seductive, and destructive charms, while Valdane fought in the skies above the lighthouse against formidable demonic gargoyles. The succubus, in desperation, threatened the prince's life and hurled the heir of Ireland from the lighthouse. Against Valdane's best abilities, chasing the prince down out of the sky, he was unable to catch the prince, who found himself dashed upon the ground. The king had given a wail of grief, the battle now being won, but at such a cost. And that is where we rejoin our heroes on this edition of D&D Stories. This is Devil's Line, Part 5. The sun begins to rise above the horizon. The waves of the sea chop and change, foam spraying high in a morning breeze. The king's wails travel across the land, kneeling beside his broken son. Valdane is knelt beside him also, the sorcerer staring into the eyes of the prince who he had just failed to save. Theodrex of Hemlon has swept from the top of the lighthouse and joins the sorcerer looking down upon Prince Eustaine. Valdane looks to the king, who is shaking with grief. And then he looks to his comrade in arms. Theodrex, a word. Theodrex gives a grim nod, and the two of them walk away as those remaining of the king's forces, about 9 or 10 in total now, gather around the king. The sorcerer and the rangers stand out of earshot upon a rock looking down into the sea. Valdane takes notes of the remains of these gargoyles that now appear to have returned to this stone-like form as they had erupted from the sides of the lighthouse. Theodrex, I didn't catch him. I wasn't quick enough. I couldn't reach him. The gargoyle, it tackled me from the air. Theodrex is just still staring into the sea. The fault is with me. Had I not allowed the succubus to seize the prince, he would not have been hurled from the lighthouse, and then you wouldn't have been forced to chase after him. By the by, I wasn't aware that you had such an ability. How did you do that? It felt like instinct, says Valdane. I'm a sorcerer. My power comes from within. It just seemed natural to me. Dragon's blood runs through my veins. Perhaps that's the reason. Theodrex just frowns. There's an awful lot that I don't know about you, sorcerer. I wouldn't say it makes me uncomfortable, but it does make me question certain things. Like what? Says Valdane. I still don't know anything about you. And while I think your efforts above the lighthouse were admirable, I do wonder why you're so invested. This is hardly the time for my life story, Theodrex. We have much greater matters to deal with currently. However, I understand your misgivings. I do appear to have strange powers that you have never witnessed before. Some of them are light, others not so much. I do have control of dark powers. Let us hope that you never have to see them. Theodrex says, what do you mean, dark powers? But Valdane just cuts him off and says, the king, he is beset with grief, and now we have to worry about a succubus birthing a deadly evil upon this realm. Well, says Theodrex, if the princess, this Maya, this succubus, whatever she is, if she's been impregnated, surely we know we have plenty of time to deal with her. Valdane frowns, looking out into the distance. You speak of the ways of man, and the ways that men and women are born naturally. This is not a natural birth. I fear that such a ritual, such a happening, may be very different from the natural way of things. So you're saying that it might not take 9 months, says Theodrex. I don't know, says Valdane. The best we can do is to try and find her as soon as possible. We need to put an end to this now. Theodrex looks troubled. Put an end to her. I tried to plunge my blade into her, but I was unsuccessful. But still, the thought of it makes me uneasy. Very uneasy. She might be a foul creature. She might be a fiend of devil's blood. But she's still a pregnant woman. And the child that she bears, how can we say that this creature is going to be evil? Valdane just stares at Theodrex in disbelief. Such a being created from dark purposes and dark rituals and dark magic. We need not gamble. We need to put an end to this succubus, and we need to do so swiftly. You seem to have made your mind up about this rather quickly, Valdane, says Theodrex. I have, says Valdane. You've seen what it has cost this land already. Ireland is now without an heir. And this king, it would seem, he says, looking over at the old, frail king crying over his dead son, is clearly not long for this world. Give him a moment then, says Theodrex. And Valdane looks to the ranger and says, we do not have a moment. Time is of the essence. And I'm sure, once counselled, the king will see this too. Very well, says Theodrex. The two of them walk back towards the king, who is now stood. He is grey-faced, but he is no longer shaking. He is looking sternly out towards the sea. Your Highness, Valdane says, I am so sorry. I did everything I could to try and catch him, but this foul creature, this succubus, I saw her, the king says. I saw her floating atop the lighthouse with those wings and horns. She is of devil's spawn. She is, says Valdane. But I'm afraid I have further bad news to impart to you. That was Princess Maya Windermere, or rather she was masquerading as her. The king looks horrified. I know. The prospect of it turns my stomach also. But this is something you have to understand, Your Highness. They lay together. That thing is now pregnant. Pregnant with your... And he pauses for a moment. Your son's child. That is what this has all been about. That is what the devil's line is. A union with royal and devil's blood to forge a dynasty that will last 1,000 years, 1,000 years of darkness. At first, Valdane and Theodrex think that the king isn't fully taking all of this in. He is just staring off into the sea. And then he starts walking, striding with pace towards the edge of the cliff. Valdane and Theodrex are horrified and they start rushing after the king's guard as well. But Magnus just stares, now standing upon the very edge, out to sea. Valdane and Theodrex stand at his side and look to see what he's staring at. The rising sun glistens upon an object far out to sea. A spire reaches from the waves. It is barely visible from where they stand. The wish writers, the king mutters. Come again, says Theodrex. The wish writers. And the king suddenly, with a maddened look in his eye, turns to the ranger and grabs him by the shoulders and says, Hope is not lost. Hope for my line is not lost. The wish writers, they dwell within the Tower of the Jinn. There have been many stories told about such a place and those who dwell there. But it is said that great powers dwell there, powers that grant those who arrive wishes. Wishes, says Theodrex, and looks confused to Valdane. Oh, come on, Theodrex, you've heard about the Jinn, surely. The Jinn, powerful entities from another plane that can appear to those mortal of this land and grant them wishes. I can return my son to this world, the king says with a crazed look in his eye. Valdane just looks to Theodrex and then back to the king. Your Highness, I know this is a difficult time, but such things are perilous to seek. Perhaps we should focus on finding this creature, finding this succubus, and putting an end to her before the line, your line, is blemished. The king looks to the ground and then looks with a fury into Valdane's eyes, and he says, I care not for my line, I care not for myself, I care only for my son who lies dead upon the ground. I would have him returned to me. Men! The king's guard, form up behind him. Find some way for us to reach the Tower of the Jinn. I would go there immediately. Valdane and Theodrex are despairing, and they say, No, my lord, my liege, please, do not. We need to focus. We need to find this succubus before she brings ruination upon your land. And the king will not hear it. The king sweeps away back towards his son. What do we do? Says Theodrex. It's at this point that we ask Mike, the DM, will we have heard of this Tower of the Jinn? This is information that is completely new to us. And we look upon the map that Mike had provided us at the very beginning of the campaign, and sure enough, there is a spire that reaches out from the sea, but it is unnamed. This Tower of the Jinn, do we know anything about it? And we are asked to do either a history or arcana roll. And both of those rolls fail abysmally. Neither Valdane nor Theodrex have heard of such a place. And so, they really have little choice. The king is set. He wishes to cross this sea to go to the Tower of the Jinn, despite the fact that every minute that passes, the succubus gets further and further away. Valdane is desperately trying to think of some way of convincing the king. But then Theodrex has an idea, and he looks to Valdane and says, This Tower of the Jinn, these wish writers that dwell there, perhaps they have this great power that the king speaks of. But perhaps we'll be able to ask for their counsel, discover perhaps if they have a method of locating the succubus. Valdane stops and thinks. You're right, Theodrex. We have no court mages this time to track the teleport, or the shadow step, or whatever fell power she uses. There may be wisdom in going after all. Theodrex looks very pleased with himself. I'm not really a man of magical matters, but I think I'm starting to get the hang of it. And Valdane smiles. And so it is that the King's Guard shortly return. They return with a small rowing boat. It is the only thing that they have managed to acquire, from the bottom of some steps that lead from the lighthouse down to the shore below. And so it is that Valdane, Theodrex, and 6 of the King's Guard, with the king, get into this rowing boat. The remaining King's Guard are told to send word back to Agistel, the capital of Ireland. And with that, the boat is pushed out to sea, and the King's Guard begin to row. The king is looking wistfully back toward the shore. Those men that return to Agistel are also bidden to take the body of the prince, and he's watching as the lifeless body of his son is taken away. Row after row, wave after wave, the rowing boat rocks up and down, steadily making progress across the disruptive sea. It is at this point that myself and Matt breathe a sigh of relief. Usually, in these campaigns, when there's travel to be done, there will be a roll upon a table that will determine whether or not we have a random encounter. And the last thing that we want is to encounter anything whilst on this boat, this crowded rowing boat with 6 King's Guard in full heavy armour and the king. Thankfully, the trip is uninterrupted, but it is arduous nonetheless. The wind whips about them, blowing sea spray into their faces. It is freezing, and it seems to take an age for them to row further and further out to sea towards the Tower of the Jinn. As they approach, the size of this tower becomes more and more apparent. It just juts straight from the sea. It isn't built upon an island or upon a rock. It just seems to erupt from the water itself. The stonework does not appear to be of this world. It seems almost to be made of one single piece of black rock that sort of spirals slightly out of the waves and into the sky. Valdane and Theodrex look upon it with wonder. Theodrex dwells for a moment and then says, Droskor would have loved to have seen this. Valdane looks across at him. He was the dwarf that you mentioned before, correct? Yes, he was a good friend. He liked many things. He liked fighting, above all, and he loved ale and wine. But third upon that list would likely be stonework. The dwarves have a talent for such things, but I think even this work is beyond them. He would have marvelled at such a thing. Valdane nods. Have you ever thought to search for him? I have, says Theodrex. Why would I not? There are other ways of finding people lost. Perhaps these wish writers will have an answer for that too. Theodrex hadn't considered this. It is true, though I am fearful to ask them of this. Why? Says Valdane. While I am ignorant, I am hopeful. While I do not have a straight answer whether the dwarf lived or died, there is hope. If they can't find him, then I'll have to assume the worst. Valdane nods. After what seems like an age, finally the wooden rowing boat knocks against the Tower of the Djinn. They have managed to dock this rowing boat against what look to be a very narrow set of steps that are built into the rock itself. And they go up to what appears to be a doorway that stands high above the reach of the waves. The king is first off the boat and, with haste, sweeps up these steps, Valdane and Theodrex right behind him. The king's guard then follow. Then, standing before this great door, the king slams a fist against it. Boom, boom, boom. All is quiet. All that can be heard is the raging of the sea. And there is no answer. "Open!" cries Theodrex. "Open this door immediately. The King of Ireland awaits your welcome." There is no answer. Valdane presses a hand against the door, closes his eyes, and casts Detect Magic. His hand is almost thrust away from the door. Magical wards lie all about this place, and Valdane tells that to the king. The king raises a fist again to once more knock upon the large doors, when suddenly they are blast open with a gust of wind, and Valdane, Theodrex, and the king behold a sight harrowing to see. Atop a swirling vortex of green energy, there is an individual, a human being, completely bold, with eyes rippling with green energy, and from his hands radiates a similar green power, and he reaches forth a hand and says, "You would have entry to the Tower of the Djinn. None are permitted. We do not recognize your royalty here." Valdane looks forth to his friends and then back to this strange individual hovering before them, and he says, "You will recognize us." And Mike says, "Roll initiative." And we're like, what? Where did this come from? We roll initiative. Thankfully, Valdane is able to go first, and he sends forth a blast of energy to try and repel this individual back. A scorching ray. It hits the individual hard in the chest, and suddenly the illusion is dispersed. This old man topples to the ground and goes, "Ow!" Theodrex is stunned by this, and he looks to Valdane, who is equally surprised. The ranger storms forward towards the old man, who's still clutching his chest with pain, the scorching ray from Valdane still sizzling at his clothing. The ranger kneels down, pats out the remaining embers, and says, "What in the nine hells do you think you're doing?" The old man says, "Putting on a display to ward you away. None have entered here in hundreds of years." "Well, you have," says Theodrex. The old man suddenly looks put out and says, "Apart from us." "Us?" says Valdane. "We are the wish writers," the old man says, sitting up with a pained look in his eye. "There are but few of us, but this is where we dwell." "We know," says Valdane. "That's why we're here. We merely wished entrance, for we are accompanied by a royal guest." "He's no king of mine," the old man sneers. And the king looks down with fury and says, "That may be so, but I would expect courtesy from you, wish writer. What is your name?" "Jareen, your highness. Jareen is my name." And may I ask, what brings you to the Tower of the Jinn? Valdane and Theodrix look to the king, who, with a steely gaze, says, My son has fallen at the hands of a fiend of the darkest plains. I would have you in your power return him to me. And Jareen looks at the king, shakes his head. You'd all better come inside. Apart from you, he looks to the king's guard, you can remain here. I will have food and drink sent to you. The king's guard sort of look put out, their hands upon their hilts, but the king gives a nod, and they stand at ease on either side of this corridor. Jareen leads them inside, and the tower seems to open up as they do so. They look up, and they can see the full height of the tower reaching above them. And there are balconies sort of inlaid into the sort of the central cylinder of this tower. And there are bookcases upon bookcases rising up into the lofty heights of this place. They can see individuals that are dressed similar to Jareen. He wears long brown cotton robes and he has fingerless gloves. And he looks to the company and he says, we must descend. We must go to the pinnacle of the tower. There we shall discuss these matters. And they begin to climb. They climb higher and higher up these spiral staircases that go all around the inside of the tower. And as they go, they see strange devices, alchemical desks and enchanting bays and the like. And Valdane sort of looking around hungrily, seeing this place of knowledge, this place of study, this place that radiates power. Finally, they reach the top of the tower, and they can look from windows to see the dizzying heights to which they have reached. They see the sea far below crashing against the black rock of the Tower of the Jinn. And then Jareen turns to them and says, I'm afraid to tell you, Highness and travellers, I didn't quite catch your names. Valdane, Theodrix. A pleasure, says Jareen. But you have come all this way for nothing. The power of the Jinn has left this place a long time ago. Their kind has not graced this world in a very long time. The king looks to the ground, crestfallen. Valdane and Theodrix just sort of exchange glances. This is why we are known as the Wish Writers, Jareen says. We study the power that the Jinn once held. We take note of every time they were making vast changes to the world with their power. When their light guided those who needed it the most. We write of their legends and their stories, and we record what it was that was asked of them, all so we can learn from this great power. What is the use of such knowledge if the power no longer remains in this world? The king snarls. It is important to understand how people of this world yearn for things beyond their grasp. To create a wish, why, it is one of the most powerful things in this world. Or at least it was. Valdane gives a nod. The power that the wish writers speak of, this is something that few sorcerers, wizards, or anyone can really attain. It is to play God. It is to change the world around us. The king suddenly staggers back, the grief heavy upon him once more. Theodrix leads him to lean upon a balustrade that looks over the entirety of the inside of this tower, the sweeping drop. Valdane looks to the Wishwriter. Jadim, we came here because the king has lost his son to the power of a succubus that intends to birth a great evil upon this land. Jadim looks to Valdane with a curious eye and says, Indeed. It is then that Theodrex and Valdane fill the Wishwriter in on all that has happened, on the battle at the lighthouse, and indeed the plot of this infernal force to overthrow the kingdom and to make way for the Devil's Line. Jadim appears to be affected by this story, and there is pity in his eyes as he listens carefully. It might not be that we can return your son to you, Highness, but there is other help we could grant you. We could offer you food and rest. And not only this, I am firm in my belief that we have the power to locate this succubus. We will be able to aid you in this plight to stop this infernal threat. The king sort of just gives a nod and walks away, leaving Theodrex and Valdane with the Wishwriter. You'll have to forgive King Magnus. He is under an awful lot of stress, says Valdane. And of course, says Jadim, he's just lost a son. He is a father in mourning. I can relate. You can, says Valdane. Indeed. It is when my son died that I decided to make my pilgrimage here. We are not really wizards, rather scholars that delve into the knowledge behind the powers that operate and run throughout this world. Valdane says, under better circumstances I would love to come back here. I'm sure there's lots that I can learn from this place. Indeed, says Jadim. Well, you seem the sort, and you would be welcome. It seems that you have concern for other people's fate, a trait that not many people share in this world today. Theodrex just sidles over to the Wishwriter and says, how long will it take for you to be able to find this succubus? What methods can you use? Why, we have this. And the Wishwriter sweeps to one end of this room, and it's right next to one of these vast windows that looks out over the sea. There is a plinth, and upon the plinth there sits a globe in which swirls strange mystical energies. This is a ball of scrying. We use it to look upon this world in search of any power that is in any way remotely connected to the Jinn. However, we can trace other sources of power too. This succubus, if indeed has this great threat growing within her, shouldn't be too hard to find. Valdane frowns. Is it a secure magical device? Oh yes, says Jadim, quite secure. There shall be no other eyes watching what I see. I shall begin work immediately. Like I say, she will not be too hard to find, especially in a landscape as bleak and cold as Ireland. Go and rest. Take some food, and when you have done so, I will hopefully have an answer for you. Very well, says Valdane. I am weary, and my powers are significantly exhausted from the battle. Theodrex nods and says, have you got any drink? We do have some, yes, some, but we are sparing with it, and Theodrex is already gone. He's already gone in search of the drink. And so they rest, and they eat, and Theodrex drinks heartily. And it's over a drink that Valdane sits next to the ranger, at a table further down towards the bottom of the tower. It's for other people. Theodrex has a mouthful of drink. Swallows it. What do you mean? You ask why I'm so invested. It's for other people. Go on, says Theodrex. Once, when I was first developing the full extent of my powers, as they were then at least, I worked with another sorcerer. We collaborated and we travelled together. We saw many things and we committed many strange and mystical powers to this world. But he was driven by ambition and anger and greed. And for a time, so was I. Theodrex is just staring. For a long time, I lived a life that I would rather not look back upon. I was ashamed of my deeds, and I realized that I had to get out before it was too late. I confronted my collaborator, and a great battle ensued. And while I was fought to a standstill, a draw, it was too late. My comrade, says Valdane with a bitter look, had alerted certain forces capable of subduing both of us. But he made his escape, and I was taken to the arcane asylum. And I vowed that if I were ever to escape the maddening clutches of the asylum, I was going to use my power to help people less fortunate than myself, to make this world a better place, and to leave it better than when I found it. Theodrex takes a swig and nods. Jarim approaches. I have had success. I have found your succubus. Valdane and Theodrex look to each other and instantly get up. They go back to the top of the tower. The king is already there awaiting, and he says, "What have you found? Have you found this blasted hellspawn?" And Jarim says, "Yes, I have. She dwells currently within the Worm's Teeth, the mountain range to the north." The king looks to Valdane and Theodrex. "My friends, you have already done so much for me, but I plead with you. Accompany me to the Worm's Teeth. Help me end this hellspawn. Let me avenge my son." And Valdane and Theodrex look to him and say, "We are with you, Highness, to the end." "We best leave at once," says Theodrex. "There is plenty of ground to cover, and before that we already need to row back to shore." "Not necessarily," says Jarim. "I have thought of this already. While we do not possess the power of the Jinn here, we still have many powerful artifacts of magical identity. We have a teleport gate here. If you are aware of a particular location and conjure an image of it within your mind, I am certain that we will be able to teleport you to a location as near to the Worm's Teeth as possible. Tell me, have you travelled there?" "As a boy," says the king, "but not for a long time." "Highness," says Valdane, "I have an idea." And with a crafty smile, Valdane shoots a look at Theodrex, a knowing look at Theodrex. There is a blast of conjuration energy that surrounds the king, Valdane, and Theodrex as they step into the tundra of Ireland, leaving the town of the Jinn far behind. "Shouldn't we have alerted your Kingsguard to you being teleported, my liege?" says Valdane. King Magnus turns and gives Valdane a smile and says, "My boy, while it is comforting to have Kingsguard at my back, I would not command them to the worm's teeth. Besides, I have been considered to be one of the greatest martial fighters in all of Main Realm. I shall be able to hold my ground." And the king sort of pulls up his long cloak and begins walking. Valdane looks to Theodrex and sort of like, wow, that guy's really sure of himself. One of the greatest martial fighters in Main Realm. Very interesting indeed. This will be handy to have around, I suppose. A king that can swing a sword in an expert-like fashion. But as the king's walking away, Valdane says, "Your Highness, you need not walk. I have other means of transportation." Theodrex just stares at Valdane with a confused look. "Theodrex, I once told you that I am in possession of dark powers as well as the light. And I did tell you that I hope a day would ever come where you would see them. I know that you have an aversion for this particular school, but I assure you the results will prove themselves in time." Theodrex says, "Stop speaking in riddles, Valdane. Explain." "I shall explain with my actions." And he points at a large mound of snow, a snow drift almost. "Hutasikatalia, hudalisagatol, himona, himonezanigal." With those words, a black power descends upon Valdane. It's almost as if the clouds above darken across the sky as the snowdrift suddenly starts shifting. Theodrex and the king step back in wonder and horror as rising to its feet stands the T-Rex that had eaten Theodrex and that Valdane had slain. An undead T-Rex looms above them. "Hello, Rex," says Valdane. "You are mine to command now. We are to ride north, and you shall be our steed." The T-Rex gives a violent, rasping roar. And Valdane, with a smile, looks to Theodrex and the king and says, "Let's end this." And that is where we're going to leave our heroes for this particular edition of D&D Stories. Once again, I hope you enjoyed this part of the tale. Will Valdane, Theodrex, and King Magnus be able to bring down the succubus and stop this destructive infernal horror from spreading across the land? Will they be able to stop the devilish dynasty of the Devil's Line? You'll have to find out next time in the concluding part of this story. If you like this video, give it a like. If you would like to see more like it, then give it a subscribe. And as ever, keep gaming.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out the D&D Stories Facebook, Patreon, and t-shirts on Redbubble. Keep gaming!